Welcome to the Mid-Ohio Valley Public Forum video podcast. This podcast features issues of interest to the residents of the Mid-Ohio Valley area. The coronavirus pandemic has changed civic life greatly throughout our country.
And this is an election year. One of the things that's really changed is that candidates cannot campaign for office the way they normally would. Generally, this time of year, they'd be out at fairs and festivals, knocking on doors, shaking hands, kissing babies. They can't do any of that now.
So many of our initial podcasts will be interviews with candidates for local and state offices. If you're a candidate and you're interested in being interviewed, you can reach us through our Facebook page, MOV Public Forum, or via email. That's movpublicforum@gmail.com.
Today we'll be interviewing Michael Folk. Mike is running for West Virginia governor. We're so glad you could join us this morning, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
With that, let's dive right in. Give us your best 1-minute introduction pitch speech.
Well, I don't really time things, but I hope I can stick it to a minute. You know, I'm a husband of almost 20 years. June 3rd is our anniversary. I was born and raised in West Virginia. We have 5 children. I went to local public schools. I went to Shepherd, what is now Shepherd University, played football at Shepherd, got a degree in economics, also studied education while I was there. Took a year off, worked in the financial industry, had all my investment licenses, 763, all those things. So I'm familiar with investments, and then did a master's degree at WVU, master's in business. In 2008, and I've done so many different things in my life as far as careers. I worked in education for 2 years, taught public schools, and then I taught at Shepherd for a couple of years, upper level marketing research, marketing courses, and I was actually scheduled to teach finance when I left and worked in industry for a year. During all that time, I worked for my dad's business. It was a small aviation business, and basically fell in love with flying, so I became an airline pilot in 2000. And in 2008, I went with a major airline, and ironically, that's when oil went from $80 to $120 a barrel. And so within months, I was laid off about 6 months after I got hired. And from 8 to 12, I was laid off, became a Mr. Mom. I worked on the farm. I'm a farm boy. We still farm down here, and built a house on the farm. And during that time frame, of course, we know we had a president in office that at least whether you like him or not, most of West Virginians don't share his values. So I ran for office in 2012 for the House of Delegates, served 2 years in the minority, 4 years in the majority. And here I am. I have a lot of good experience in the legislature, working with both sides of the aisle to get things done and to put West Virginia back on the right path. And that's why I'm running for governor.
Oh, I'm sorry to step on you there.
That's all right. It sounded like I was done.
All candidates are different, and you've already outlined a little bit about your background, your knowledge and skills. But what do you think really sets you apart from the other candidates?
Well, I didn't even look, like I said, I didn't really pre-look at these questions, but I covered a lot of my experience and skills in that previous response. What sets me apart is I think that diverse background sets me apart, and the fact that I have a background in the legislature. I know the players, for the lack of a better way of putting it. I have good relationships with people on both sides of the aisle. And especially in these trying times with the coronavirus you mentioned, we have some serious budget problems in the state of West Virginia, and every state does, and even our country does. They're printing money like it's the first stimulus package that they passed, the $2.2 trillion ones, was bigger than almost as big as QE1, QE2, and QE3, if you know what that means, the quantitative easing that they did after the 2008 financial crisis. So we have to be able to tighten our belts as a state. Just like if anybody I'm sure people's law, I'm an airline pilot. So our industry has cut our schedule 90%. And if things don't change by this fall, there will be massive layoffs in the airline industry. And what I did in 2008 when that happened, I had my financial house in order, and that's what the state has to do. And I have a history in 2017 specifically when we had the budget deficit, when Governor Justice took office, and he had run on a platform of not raising taxes, and he was a businessman. He could balance the budget without raising taxes, but he didn't do that. He tried to raise taxes $450 million. And he said, and I'll kind of paraphrase what he said, but he equated to the state as a patient on life support. And the only way we could save it was to raise taxes. And in my case, I didn't believe that had been the paradigm in the state and then really in the country. But I thought we could do just like every household has to do, which is tighten your budget. And in my case, I did something that was my understanding almost historical in the state of West Virginia for a state legislator to put their own budget in. So I was the lead sponsor of a budget that ultimately the blueprint that was our budget became law in the middle of June 2017 without the signature of the governor. And of course, the original one was, everybody remembers, was vetoed on a silver platter with a cow pie. But that was in essence the budget that became law without the governor's signature. The only thing he did was raise revenue estimates by about $100 million. So I put that budget in that at the time gave the teachers a 2% pay raise and balanced our budget without raising one tax. And I think that's what sets me extremely apart from the other major players in this race.
Well, it sounds like that might also play into the next question. We're looking for your main motivation for deciding to step up and run now.
Yeah, that's a pretty good segue. You know, I just, I was never involved in student government at the high school or college level. I literally just got involved locally with some issues specific to our area that involved, for instance, corruption. And we've known our share of corruption at the state level, and probably every county's had their share of corruption that, you know, the people talk about in the community. That is kind of like the elephant in the room, but nobody really talks about it in the media a lot of times because of the players involved. So I filed at the time, it was some self-dealing being done at the local airport by some bankers and people like that, and filed an ethics complaint that the ultimate outcome of that ethics complaint was that it was called a conciliation agreement. It's the equivalent of a plea bargain, to where these guys didn't admit fault, but they were basically ordered and signed an agreement saying that they would never vote on matters that pertain to that their bank had lent money to this one entity. So, and I've taken that same, those issues are big to me in the state of West Virginia. I think everybody is familiar with something at the state or their local level where there's been corruption, mismanagement, the government's not been held accountable. And I took those same things, those same principles down to the state when I served in the state house. As an example, I mentioned the ethics complaint. There was no statutory requirement for the commission, the review commission for it's called probable cause review commission. There was no statute that delineated a time frame in which they had to act on an ethics complaint. So that was one of the bills that I got passed that gave a statutory time frame, and I can't remember what it is now, but I think it's like 180 days, that they have to act on an ethics complaint. I think it's important that the people trust their government and trust them to be fiscally responsible, but they need to be ethical and held accountable when they're not doing things proper. And that's been kind of one of the things that led me to run for office.
So Mike, what do you think is your wow factor? What is the one thing about you that if a voter knew about it, it would make them say, wow, I'm going to vote for that guy?
This is the one question my wife said, because I told you I hadn't really looked at the questions. This is the second question. She said, well, they ask you a question about wow, what's your wow factor? You know, I think probably that I'm brutally honest and I don't play party politics. In other words, if a Republican is doing something that is unprincipled, fiscally irresponsible, unethical, it doesn't matter their party. And to show you what I mean is, so I have the unique background that I served in the minority for 2 years. And of course, in the minority, I was calling out at that time, the Democrats for what I thought they were doing that was maybe fiscally irresponsible or unconstitutional in the legislature or just bad policy. And, they thought I was just being partisan. Well, then we took control when the Republicans took control. You know, and I told Tim Armstead at the time, who's the speaker during my whole career in the House, that when I agree with something you say, I will be completely for you, and I'll do a factual basis, argue on the floor on the behalf of the policy. But if you're wrong, and I think you're wrong, whether it's for fiscal responsibility issues, constitutional issues, or whatever it may be, I'm going to point it out, and I'm going to try to use facts and do that. So I gained a lot of respect in my 4 years in the majority when I would do that, and we were successful at defeating some very what we thought were unconstitutional bills. As a matter of fact, one sponsor of a bill came up to me, not sponsor, presenter of a bill came up to me and my buddy Pat McGeehan, and we had no intentions we didn't think we would kill this bill in particular. It had to do with strikes on jury selection. But Pat McGeehan gave a passionate talking about the Western philosophy that this is the one time that the defense has the upper hand on the prosecution, because when the government is prosecuting somebody, they have unlimited resources compared to a defense. Somebody being prosecuted for something they've done wrong, and they wanted to make equal strikes. But I guess at the time, if I recall in law, that it was the one time that the defense had more strikes than the prosecution, and we defeated that bill by just sticking to constitutional principles. So I think that's the one thing that's a wow, if you want to call it a wow factor. I'll call, if I think something is wrong, it doesn't matter whether it's a Republican or a Democrat position, I will call it out. And at the same time, I will defend. You probably know Doug Reynolds. Doug Reynolds had an amendment. Doug ran for Attorney General, I believe, last time against Patrick Morrisey. He had an amendment one time when we were in the majority and he was in the minority. And it was an amendment that would require that at least one person that sat on the State Board of Education have a child in the public school system. What a novel concept. And he came to me before he presented that amendment and asked if I would speak on it and support it. And I said, well, sure. You mean they're giving you pushback on this? And he said, yeah. I said, well, I'll speak on it and support it. And he got it passed. I think it got taken out in the Senate in that particular bill. But, if something is right for the citizens and for accountability in our government, and to give a voice at a table, that a voice should be heard, like a parent on a board of education, I'll stand up for what's right. So that's how I'm different. That's kind of the wow factor, if you want to call it that.
So if you're elected, tell us the one thing you really want to accomplish during your term in office.
Well, the one thing that I would love to accomplish, and I think it would change the whole paradigm in this state, especially because most people think they're, nickel and dimed, whether it's fees, taxes, local fees and taxes, is that we have to change. And this is just a mathematical reality. If we don't get our state back to growing its population, we will wither and die on the vine. And the way you do that is not a 1 minute answer. We really have to change the paradigm in the state to make West Virginia competitive, whether it's for people personally staying here, as an example, totally getting rid of, we lose retired people that are have had good careers and retire in West Virginia and make enough money that their Social Security, as an example, is taxed, that they leave the state and go to, what's that place called? Florida, where they don't have an income tax and they have nice weather longer during the year. Or it's the young people that are leaving because they think it's too hard to start a business, and their entrepreneurial nature that they have, which a lot of young people have, leave the state for opportunity. So we have to change their paradigm to change the very real reality that if we don't reverse the population loss, West Virginia is in a really bad spot from a demographic perspective, and also from a financial perspective. As far as my grandfather used to say, you can't get blood out of a turnip. So if we have a continually reduced population, but yet an expanding budget for the state, That's not a good mathematical equation to have, and we need to change that.
Well, Mike, that comes right into my next question. I am in my 6th decade of life, and I believe just every gubernatorial candidate that I can ever remember has promised more jobs. And yet here we are. We're still shedding jobs. We're losing population and becoming poorer as a state and as individuals. How do you plan to do what everyone else has promised to do and fail to do?
Well, I guess I sort of touched on that before. In the previous question. First of all, I've driven the state back roads, of course, the highways when I'm in a hurry as much, but I've driven Route 50 from the Virginia line clear to the Ohio River. I've driven Route 2 from Chester to Huntington. I've driven 250 out of Fairmont clear to Moundsville, New Martinsville area. And the biggest thing that I see, and this is, again, it's going to take a change in paradigm, because I'm sure you've had a few people say on your interviews that they were for, and I don't think you had asked a specific question here about this, but we have to make ourselves competitive with neighboring states. We do that both on a regulatory basis, a tax basis, quality of life basis. I think we already have an incredible, it's one thing I've noticed around the state. People might not live in big houses, but I think they live an incredible quality of life compared to other places that I've been. As an airline pilot, I've been all over Europe, all over the Northeast. I was based in Newark, New Jersey at one time, and I would take Southern West Virginia making $25,000 a year over making $100,000 a year in New York City any day of the week. But the way we make ourselves more competitive is, quite frankly, we do have an immense amount of natural resources that we export without adding value to them. So we are one of only about a dozen states that have the equipment and inventory tax. In the Ohio Valley, you can literally look across the river at Ohio and see all the manufacturing and commercial development that's taken place. Ohio doesn't have the equipment and inventory tax. Neither does Pennsylvania. Southern West Virginia could benefit this from, value-added products in the timber industry. Over in the Northern Panhandle and the Ohio River Valley, we could, if we started, instead of just piping our natural gas, now we still have such an excess of natural gas, we'll still be piping some of it out of state, but keeping it here, and of course make ourselves, like in the Eastern Panhandle, we're so close to DC in the Northeast corridor here that we can benefit from the technology. Same thing up in the Morgantown area. And people say, well, you got to be able to replace that revenue from the lost inventory. The latest numbers that I've seen on the equipment and inventory tax is somewhere between $95 and $100 million for existing businesses. We already do sweetheart deals. They're called pilot programs. That's how we got Macy's over here. That's how we got Procter and Gamble. They're already given those benefits to large businesses. But places like Warwood Tool up in Wheeling, who's been around since the mid 1800s, they don't get that same benefit. I got a friend of mine from high school who runs a machining company up here west of Hedgesville. He said he would add a couple jobs, and his equipment is like $1 million a piece for a piece of equipment. He'd add on to his building, which, by the way, if you add on to a building or you build a new commercial building on one of these empty concrete pads along the Ohio River in Southern West Virginia, the building does pay taxes. All it would do is get rid of the tax on the equipment inside. So it's not a zero. In other words, you don't have to make up. I think some of the economic growth would make up for the lost revenue from the equipment, because commercial buildings pay twice the tax rate as a residential building. So it's not a zero-sum game. And we need to shift our paradigm because of that to realize, and I'm not saying cold turkey, get rid of it, but I think on existing businesses, you could get rid of it over a 4 or 5 year phase out, and any new investment, you could get rid of it overnight, because if they're making new investment, in other words, building onto their building or adding a new building and creating a whole new business, there's going to be tax revenue from that commercial building that we don't get now. So it's not a zero-sum game. I think that's the way we have to do it. And of course, you said your 6th decade, you're nearing retirement. people like you that may, have taxable Social Security. Now, they passed a bill to reduce a little bit of Social Security, but it as one local CPA said on a local radio show, it wasn't worth the paper it's written on. So, and I had that position when I was in the House. I tried to make that come into fruition, even if it was having to phase it out because of our hard budget times. So.
Well, access.
Hey, did I just hear a wow moment?
I have a tickle in my throat.
Well, you said wow, though. That usually doesn't make you say wow.
So access to high-speed, reliable internet is holding our state back from becoming what it needs to be. What's your plan for getting high-speed, affordable, reliable broadband internet to all corners of the state?
Well, first of all, this has been tried for at least a decade. When I first was elected to the House, I served on Government Org, where we listened to these PERG reports, which are basically audits from the legislative auditor. And one of the ones that we had at that time was from the stimulus package under Obama, where we got a whole bunch of, during the financial crisis, we got millions, I think it might have been $100 million. It was an obscene amount of money. And do you all remember where a lot of that money went? $20,000 Cisco routers. $20,000 Cisco routers. One example was a little single wide mobile home that was being used as a library in Marmot, West Virginia. Got a $20,000 Cisco router that could handle like 1,000 phone lines. So one of the things we have to do when we spend public money is we have to do it efficiently, and we have to do it without the cronyism that has taken place. And Frontier until just recently, has long had and several previous administrations had the ear of the executive, the top executive in the state. And I think a lot of that stuff held us back. And as an example, and it was an executive decision that could have changed this, you literally had to, if you were going to bury fiber, you had to do it just like you would do water and sewer. Certain depth, certain, just like you're trying to keep a pipe from freezing. Well, fiber doesn't have that problem. So allowing for micro trenching along our public right-of-ways, I think is something that was a long time coming, and it is now in effect. One thing we have to look at, and I talked about this because I have a couple brother-in-laws that are big tech guys. And I think that the future, especially in more of our rural areas, is wireless, shooting it off of a beam. Matter of fact, right now, we are shooting off of a beam from the main farm complex to my house because I'm too far off the road to get cable. So I think that's where the future of technology is. And it's gotten cheaper and cheaper. When I first implemented this on my house, it was about $1,000 in hardware. Now you can get the same hardware for about $300 to $500. And then you just need the labor to put it up. So I think the future is wireless. You can get very high speed. I don't think you've buffered at all for me, and I haven't buffered for you. Some places that will be difficult in this state, and it's because of some federal installations. As an example, if you've ever been over by Green Banks,
yep.
That'll be difficult because of the frequencies that they have to have. It's a dead zone. So we have to be realistic that it's, in that case, you'll have to run fiber. But there are other places in the state that I think can benefit drastically through the use of wireless. Anybody that promises you that West Virginia is going to have broadband at every nook and cranny in the state in the next 4 years is lying to you. And I won't do that. So that's kind of the wow factor with me, but I think we can incrementally do it and get ourselves in a good position. I mean, I stop at a little coffee shop for my internet when I need it up near Blackwater Falls in Thomas, West Virginia. Even though it's a little rural town, they have incredible wireless in that town. So it is doable. And some of it is getting rid of some of the monopolistic practices that have been allowed to foster and fester in our state, and through influence with elected people And I think that's waning, and that's part of the solution. And then part of the solution is literally letting the private sector flourish. So, that's kind of where I am on that.
Everyone knows, and you've touched on this, that West Virginia has been declining in population for decades. Our best and our brightest grow up here, get educated here, and go somewhere else to live and work. And we don't have people coming into the state either. So do you have a specific plan to turn this around? And how would you do it?
Well, I think we've already touched base on a lot of this stuff. The biggest thing is first of all, we have to stop the population decline. I think you do that by keeping your people that have had good careers here. You also make it a place because of our natural resources and our parks and our the whitewater rafting. We have all 4 seasons. That's something Florida doesn't have. Florida doesn't have the same things that we have. They really don't have mountains. So we need to keep people that retire here. We can attract people that retire from, in the Eastern Panhandle, we already do this. People literally that work for and this is unique to the Eastern Panhandle, but people that work for the federal government will try to get moved in their last 5 years of their career from the DC metro close within 20 miles of DC or whatever, in Rockville or Montgomery County or Northern Virginia. They come over here and work for 5 years, maybe commuting or at a local installation here in the Eastern Panhandle. And then they retire because of the quality of life. I think other parts of the state could also benefit from that. And then for our younger people, we really have to make West Virginia allow it to be an incubator for entrepreneurism, because most younger people and this is the interesting thing about this, if we can couple this with getting the broadband in some smaller towns as an example. Thomas has literally seen a rejuvenation, it seems like, as an example. I drive through Thomas all the time. And since it's right off of Quarter H, people, as long as they have access to broadband stuff, and with the silver lining of this pandemic is that people are realizing they can do a lot of their stuff that they would normally go into an office building in Northern Virginia. If you've got a good broadband in Thomas, West Virginia, which, like I said, the coffee shop, I know there's access there because I've been there and done it. And we need to make it a place where people can work remotely. And we do that and I think that would benefit, if we could do that in Southern West Virginia, it would be it wouldn't happen overnight. But the thing about Southern West Virginia hospitality is incredible. And I know some people that have moved there, and they moved there initially because of the cost of living. But most of those people are older people maybe that move in. Like I know the one couple that have a bed and breakfast in Welch. But we need to do that for our young people to allow them, if we can get that broadband into those small towns that are so beautiful in Southern West Virginia that, the one little town in Bramble, I think it's called, which years ago, and it's a cute little town, sort of like Shepherdstown. But at one time, they had a high school basketball team that won the state championship one time. They were called the Millionaires because at one time it was a really wealthy area. And those kind of places would be like little havens for people, as long as you had some broadband and stuff, that the young population would love to go to, because Southern West Virginia, that Bluefield, Beckley area is so close to North Carolina, the beaches. It's sort of like the Eastern Panhandle, but in a more rural flavor. And I just think we have to make it a better place so we can change the paradigm in West Virginia.
Well, we've asked what we see as some of the major issues facing our state. Aside from what we've already talked about, what do you see as the next 3 largest problems facing West Virginia? And give us your nutshell plan for dealing with them.
Well, of course, right now, based on what's going on, we're going to have a budget problem. And there's only one person that's running that's really put in a budget of his own that wasn't made up by somebody else. And some of the budget things that are unique to West Virginia, one of the ways we solve that is we have what they call reappropriated dollars. Have you ever heard of that? So in the federal government budgeting, if you don't use it, you lose it. Well, in West Virginia state budgeting, if an agency doesn't use their money, they get to carry it over. Back in 2017, when I made my own budget, there was over $300 million, between $300 and $400 million of reappropriated dollars. In other words, they would, if an agency normally would spend $10 million a year, but they only spent 8, they would carry over $2 million. And then they would continue to get the $10 million the next year. So these budget reappropriated dollars continue to grow. So one of the things that's a big deal is balancing the budget, and next year is going to be a big deal because of the current pandemic. So that's the first thing that has to be tackled. Second thing is education. We have a lot of bureaucracy in education. We do a lot of testing that, we got rid of the smarter balance, which was costing us, I believe the last number was 23 million and change for that statewide testing. I would like to change that and put it back into the hands of our teachers, have a teacher developed test in the state of West Virginia. And some people say this is cliche, but I think getting back to the basics, and from my background in education and my relationships with a lot of people that are still in the education field, we need to change the way we teach math back to some basics. James Milgram had some great standards out in California, pre-Common Core, that were the best in the country and some of the best in the world. Sandra Stotsky out of Massachusetts had the best ELA standards. And we need to improve education, both at the secondary, but we need to, not just K through 12, but at the higher education too. And the third thing, let's see. Well, and this is kind of dealing with the regulatory issue. We need to, just as an overall theme, need to look at what would make us on par or more competitive than our neighboring states, because we're competing with other states for the population, for jobs, for everything. And I think West Virginia has a good mix of things that make us competitive if we just can clean up and streamline our government. Because quite frankly, most people don't realize this, but I did some numbers on the taxation in West Virginia. And so when Reagan gave his speech in '64 that launched his political career, it was called A Time for Choosing. The tax burden, state, local, federal taxes, was a little over, I think it was 37%. In West Virginia, the most recent numbers that I was able to come up with through both census data and a pretty good couple different good tax websites was that right now, West Virginia state taxation fee, local state taxation, municipal and county level and state level was about $9,000 per capita. The federal taxation was just under $4,000. You combine those two, it's about is around $13,000 in taxation, 13 to 14. And if you looked at the latest census data with the per capita income, you do the numbers, and that works out to be 53% taxation. And we have to change that. And we can only change that by reducing the size of government in Charleston and putting more things back in the local purview.
So we are often our own harshest critics. This is a two-part question. What do you think is your worst quality, and what do you think is your best quality?
Well, yeah, I didn't know this question until I hadn't looked at
the worst one for last.
Well, I don't know if it's, I'd like to twist it around, make it a good quality, but I am very, I think it's a good quality, but I have very foundational principles, but that other people see that sometimes as a hindrance. But I don't think it is, because if you're grounded in principles, you're less likely to be swayed by lobbyists or, some special interest group. I know that's what some people say sometimes. The thing I would hear from a few Republican colleagues, that would be that you're not a team player. It would be the quote. And I think the team player is the team of what's best for West Virginia, not necessarily what's best for the party or whatever. It's based on principles. And the best quality is obviously, I'm a profuse researcher, and I kind of get back on that worst quality thing just a little bit. This actually, some people, I get into the details, into the weeds a lot more than a lot of people want to just hear sales pitches. And I'm more of a get into the weeds, get into the real policy issues, and that's what makes it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's the thing that makes me I think the best for this job, but it's also the thing that some critics say that you need to just be more brief. Don't give them, just give them a overview of what you're talking about instead of getting into the details, because the details, the devil, as they say, is in the details. And if you've ever read a piece of legislation that has one title that sounds great, but then you read the bill and you found out, wait a minute, that's not what the title says it is. So that's, it's a double-edged sword. It's both my greatest fault and my greatest quality, I believe. So I don't know if that's what I got to say about that.
Well, with that, we'll move into the last section of our interview. These questions are meant to get to know you, the person, not necessarily you, the candidate. If you had to come up with a single most favorite thing or place in our state, what would it be? Not the people. They're not a thing.
Yeah, I see that. I see your, and this is influenced greatly by what my children love to do. So we went to Blackwater Falls, I don't know, probably 5-6 years ago for the first time, maybe 7 years ago. And I always give my kids the option, where do you want to go? Do you want to go to Blackwater Falls or do you want to go to the beach? And they always say Blackwater Falls. And so we love that place. I think and when I say Blackwater Falls, it's not necessarily just the park. The whole area up there is beautiful. The Canaan Valley area, we've driven down. There's a fly-in community there, privately owned airstrip, and I'm a pilot, so it's kind of cool to go down there. We've ridden horses down there. My kids love that. There's just so many, and we haven't been up there in the winter yet, but you've got the skiing up there too if you want to partake in that, and maybe my kids will do that when they're older. I've decided that I don't have any major knee problems. So unless something changes drastically, because I don't have as much athletic time as I used to, I don't know if I'll take up skiing because I don't want to end up in the side of a tree. Or maybe I could just go, what do they call the little bunny slopes or whatever? Maybe I could just do those. But, I really love that part of the state, and I kind of like it. I love it because my kids love it. And, my goal in life as a father and husband is to keep the kids happy and keep them heading in the right direction. So that's kind of, and I hate to limit it to one place because there is something unique about every part of West Virginia, and not every part. The Northern Panhandle has its own flavor. The Central West Virginia has its own flavor. Southern West Virginia has its own flavor. Potomac Highlands have its own flavor. I do love the whole state, and if I didn't, I would have left a long time ago. But my family's been here since before this state was a state, and since before our country was a country. And I just want to try to, make it a better place for everybody to live, work, and raise your family.
We keep meaning to go up there to Blackwater in the winter for the tubing. They put in that conveyor belt.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty enjoyable. I think my kids would love that, and that's the good alternative to skiing, and probably less likely to mess your knee up.
Yeah.
So, Mike, what are your own personal core values?
Well, I mean, and this is kind of touched base on this, is honesty, even if it's in the face of, somebody's not going to agree with you. I believe very strongly in fiscal responsibility. integrity, keeping your word. And more importantly, if you make a mistake, which I'm human, I've made mistakes, own up to them. And I try to live my life that way. If I make a mistake, and I've actually admitted on the floor of the house one time, I went and looked at it. You're right, I was wrong. So, and that's something I think that's novel to some of the candidates in this race. I mean, is it all right to mention your opponents? Maybe not by name, but when somebody says, the two guys with a lot of money in this race are attacking each other vociferously on their ads. And one's attacking the one guy for a $450 million tax increase proposal. The other one's attacking him for going to China on the taxpayer dime. And the reality is the guy that went to China was sent there by the now governor. And the other guy that's bashing the governor for the $450 million tax increase supported that tax increase. He's on the record of supporting it. Brad McElhaney at Metro News in February of 17 reported on it and quoted him. Let's get over, just admit you were wrong. And the budget could be balanced without raising taxes. But these guys, they just don't do it. And they're not the only ones. There are politicians on both sides of the aisle that fail to own up when they make a mistake. Now, as an example, and I can't remember his name now, I just recently read on Newsweek. You ever gotten on the Newsweek website? Where a former senator from South Carolina admitted that he was wrong by basically bowing down to China and giving them favored nation status for trade over a decade ago. And that takes a big person, especially when, well, he's not in politics anymore, but even though he did it 20 years later or 15 years later, however long it's been, at least he owned up to it. And that's all I ask in my representatives. And that's why I'm running, because I don't think they've ever owned up to any mistakes. So
what are you, the person, passionate about?
Well, I'm passionate about, it depends on what, well, I really enjoy spending time with family, the farm. That's why it's you give up a lot when you run for office. So and obviously having young children from 3 to my oldest will be 16 in November, to go to Charleston and live, which I will, reside in the mansion, unlike some people. And from a personal level, I'm very passionate about my family, my close friends. I really love flying, although I don't know if I'll be doing much of that in the airlines anytime soon. And then if you want to talk about political perspective, to add in a little bit of flavor of that, is I'm very passionate about constitutional principles and really reining our government spending back in and putting more decision-making back into the hands of the citizens on how their money is spent, by literally lowering that tax burden in the state of West Virginia from 53% something below 50. I think the citizens in the private sector, whether it's the businesses or the individual households, are much better at determining what their money is spent on.
So you've touched on this a couple of times, but maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit more. What do you like to do on your off time?
Well, since February of last year, when you're running a grassroots type campaign, I've been all over the state. So I haven't really had a lot of off time, but when I do love to, I've got an old 1946 Aeronca Champ airplane. I love to go flying in that. And then the last couple, I guess basically Mother's Day, and I don't watch a lot of TV or anything, but we have Netflix, and I just did a search, classic movies in Netflix, and my children and I, we watched, and my whole family on Mother's Day, watched like 3 movies. Like one of them was like, the Raiders of the Lost Ark type series. And then we watched an old Western with John Wayne. I can't remember what the third movie was, but so I enjoy spending time with my family. And I love, and this is really off time, but I do a lot of cooking. My great uncle was a world-renowned geologist, and he spent about 30 years in Italy. And I've spent time in Italy. My wife and I took our belated honeymoon there back in the spring of 2001. So I really acquired a lot of nice recipes from my granduncle, who's now passed away. He was a University of Texas at Austin professor, but this is what's unique. He got his love for rocks on the farm that I'm sitting in right now in Swan Pond, West Virginia, halfway between Martinsburg and Shepherdstown. So a lot of good things come out of West Virginia. Getting people's, in his case, rocks. But, so I love to do Italian cooking. And so that's the other thing I do with my off time. But it's a win-win. I enjoy doing it. And my family enjoys me doing it because I'm pretty good at making some from scratch recipes.
So what would you say is the most unique thing about you?
As a person, not a candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm well-read, I think. Not as well-read as some, but a lot better well-read than others. So I have a very diverse background. My Pat McGeehan's probably a lot further along on that book list that he's read. But I guess the unique thing about me as a person is that, I have a very diverse background. I can speak and ask questions when I have, and this is, and you're saying as a candidate, but the one thing about it is when you were in the House of Delegates, you had professional or expert witnesses come up and testify on various issues. And because of my background and growing up on a farm, my dad's business was a crop dusting business, his aviation business. So I got to know, although I don't have a degree in biology or chemistry, I got to know the chemistry of the different various things that were used to grow crops. And of course, raised on a farm, I know a little bit about cattle, beef, dairy, chickens, pigs, all that stuff. And then at the same time, I also am well versed in economics and accounting. I can read a financial statement very well. I don't know, but most people these days don't have pensions per se. So I manage my own 401k at the airline. I don't do mutual funds. And I've done very well in that. I'm very attuned to the financial markets. And that's kind of one of the things that raises a lot of concern for me in the future is literally the printing presses are running wild. I think they might even bought a few more in DC at the Federal Reserve, because the hidden tax on the citizens will be the fact that our money is devalued with the printing of dollars. So that's where I'm a little different than most people. Most people running for office don't even have a clue about the history of the Federal Reserve. So.
Well, with that, we've come to the end. Now's the time that we like to give you a few minutes to tell us and the voters anything that you think we've missed that we need to know, including how to get more information on your campaign, how to get involved, donate, get in touch with you, etc.
Well, I can tell you, you're more like I said, I didn't really look at it except for my wife told me about a few of the questions. Yours is one of the better. I'm gonna give you a little kudos. I loved you're very thorough in your questioning. It's very good. My campaign is one I'm running for basically changing the paradigm in Charleston, and it really needs to change because, believe it or not, the Republicans have been in control and gotten some really good things done. But this is where it's different in the governor's mansion, not mansion, but the office of governor is the one position that is not shifted. And we still have a lot of bureaucracy there that's held over that needs to change. And this is not Democrat or Republican. This is establishment, quite frankly. The establishment is killing the state of West Virginia, a slow death. And I think I'm the person that will take and put the citizens of West Virginia first and our state first to make it a better place to live, work, and raise your family. And, my Facebook page is Michael Folk for West Virginia Governor. My website is folk4wv.com. And yes, you should ask for donations. Just to put it in perspective, I've spent somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 on this campaign. My opponents, on the other hand, the one has spent at last filing over $2.5 million of his own money. The governor has spent over, somewhere in its probably same neighborhood. I know he spent over $4.5 million of his own money last time. And you have to question why they're doing that. And my campaign is because I'm trying to make West Virginia a better place for everybody, not just the elite. And that's not a party issue. That's just really an establishment issue. And I think the grassroots is starting to take a hold, and we're getting some ads running. And if you want to donate, 10 or $20 to help me get another couple radio or TV ads out there, that would be greatly appreciated. And I do appreciate you having this forum. And I think it's been quite frankly, one of the best outlets we've had, definitely in the last 2 or 3 months, but I think even better than the various dinners and fairs and festivals. I mean, I always like to talk to the people one-on-one, but as far as being able to reach a lot of people, your outlet seems like it's been a very good experience.
Well, thank you, Michael. We are so glad that you could join us this morning and take time to tell the voters what your campaign is about and what you'd like to do. So everyone, thanks for watching, and remember, wash your hands.
Yes, wash for at least, 20 seconds, soap and water. That's right.
You have to sing Almost Heaven.
Country roads.